valuable sources of information, especially diplomatic sources, that are available to modern scholars. It is important to know not only what he actually did, but what options he rejected, what he did not do. Often we cannot be absolutely sure, but we need not accept partisan assertions and exaggerations, either pro or con. We have to rely on the available record. My first concern has been to determine and to report accurately what happened and how it happened. The task of separating demonstrable truth from the myths, legends, and downright misrepresentations that gather around an eminent public man and highly controversial figure is difficult and exacting, but no one who would tell a true and honest story can escape it. In the course of this narrative, I frequently point out what I regard as mistakes and misjudgments by Jefferson's contemporaries, but my general policy has been to let the facts, as I have ascertained them, speak for themselves. At times I refer specifically to what I believe to be errors on the part of modern writers, but I have made no special attempt to measure this account against the works of others. While I am much indebted to certain monographs, and have greatly benefited from the labors of other scholars, this is a fresh study, based on original sources, and it must stand on its own feet. The biographer or historian, besides trying to answer the questions what and how, should do everything he can to find out why things happened, and his effort to arrive at the fullest possible understanding should not subject him to the charge of trying to explain things away. I hope this work constitutes a contribution to knowledge, but knowledge can avail little if it does not contribute to understanding. The difficulty of reading the minds of men, great in any case, is magnified in that of the many-sided Jefferson, who wrote incessantly, but rarely revealed his innermost thoughts and feelings. It is not at all surprising that his aims and motives have been variously interpreted. There is something in him for almost everybody, and through the years the tendency has been for observers to see in him what they wanted to see. This has been especially true of persons whose interest in him has been primarily political. Without claiming to have arrived at the whole truth about him as a public man, I shall venture some reflections on the relations between his political ideas, as previously expressed, and his conduct of the presidency in the period covered by this book. It should be remembered that, despite the range of his personal interests, he had been primarily a man of affairs since he attained maturity, and that he never cast his thought in systematic form. He was no theorist, remote from life, but he was a characteristically thoughtful, as well as a highly articulate man, who sought to guide his steps by truth as he perceived it, and by principles which, as he believed, had been adduced by reason. During the first decade of his political life, Americans were inquiring into the principles of politics to an unexampled degree, and he was in the mainstream of revolutionary ideology at the beginning of the Republic. A score of years later, writing to a discouraged supporter, he said that the spirit of 1776 was not dead but merely slumbering. He identified this with republicanism. He could never forget that John Adams, who was now president, had shared with him the pangs and hopes that attended the nation's birth, but it seemed to him that this old comrade had become unmindful of the spirit of 1776. Judging from his own words, after he assumed the first office, he believed that the Revolution of 1800 marked the revival of that spirit, and a return to first principles. It should not be supposed, however, that his political ideas had remained unchanged through a quarter of a century. He never ceased to look back with nostalgia on the early years of the American Revolution, but this is not to say that he was unaffected by the events and developments that occasioned the Federal Convention and the framing of the Constitution of 1787. He reacted against the anarchic libertarianism and the trend toward democratic despotism that marked the period, though he was less disillusioned with his countrymen than were his friends Washington and Madison. Out of the country during the most critical years, he was less disturbed than they by the domestic turmoil, and more fearful of autocracy, such as he had observed at first hand in Europe. He certainly viewed the aftermath of the American Revolution with no such distaste and dismay as Alexander Hamilton, with whom Madison parted company in Washington's first administration, and whom Jefferson then regarded as a would-be monarchist. The term may have been too strong, but Hamilton had slight sympathy with republicanism as Jefferson understood it at the dawn of American independence, and more recently his fears of popular rule had been quickened by the